Good afternoon, everyone. This is an update about navigating the U.S. immigration landscape. My name is Rye Meyer. My co-presenter's name is Dee Patters, and we'll put our information on in the next slide in a moment. But first, I just want to mark the fact that today is April 30th of 2025, and we're giving an update and an overview of immigration changes. Things are happening very rapidly in our immigration legal system, so this is very linked into time and place. Some of the things that we say today may change tomorrow or at some other time in the future. As I said, my name is Rye Meyer, and our co-presenter today is Dee Patters. We are both immigration attorneys with Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Dubuque. And we both came on board in 2018 to this program. So seeing changes happen in the immigration system is nothing new to either Dee or I, and changes for what we perceive as the better and for the worse, things that have benefited our clients and things that have harmed our clients' legal abilities to pursue immigration relief in the United States. Catholic Charities Archdiocese of Dubuque is a social service agency that services 30 counties in Northeast Iowa. And Dee and I, our main job is to provide immigration legal services to immigrants. And we are part of a team of attorneys, and we also have an accredited representative who are providing direct legal services to immigrants. Catholic Charities also provides other types of social services, not just an immigration legal department. We have counseling, jail and prison reentry, housing, and poverty reduction are all things that we are engaged in. But today's slideshow is primarily focused on immigration updates, and I will warn you, there have been a lot of updates. There's a lot of stuff in the news, a lot of stuff on social media, a lot of official policy changes, things coming out of the federal government related to the practices and enforcement of immigration laws. So today's updates, it's going to be like the 30,000-foot flyover. We are not going to be able to dedicate significant time to any individual update. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg, but we feel that's important to keep people informed within the Archdiocese of Dubuque as it applies to our parishes, our neighbors, and our community. And we also welcome you to attend and watch this presentation if you're outside the Archdiocese. Hopefully you'll find this informative as well. Dee, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Just wanted to sort of piggyback on what Rye is saying and say that we are going to do an overview of all of the changes that have occurred. There are very, very many of them, but please be aware that there is still a great amount of uncertainty about how these changes are going to be implemented, if they're going to be implemented. So you will not leave here today with an ironclad idea of what's going to happen in the future, because unfortunately, we just don't know. We've had to learn to live with a lot of uncertainty, and that's just what we are dealing with our current situation. So to start, again, legal disclaimer, the content that we're sharing here today is about legal issues, but none of this is intended to be legal advice or a substitute for your own legal counsel. Again, our purpose here today is education and information. And so please, if you have a situation that is specific to you, we advise you to seek legal counsel specific to your situation. Next, we're going to talk about the importance of the language that we use when we talk about immigration. Everybody knows that the language we use can really color our conversations and how people interpret what we're saying. So it's important to choose accurate terminology to help frame conversations and make sure that things are clear. We seek to use terms that are factually correct, that are clear, and that, and most importantly, or equally importantly, do not dehumanize. So some suggestions that we offer are undocumented immigrant or unauthorized immigrant versus illegal immigrant. No person is illegal. To call someone an illegal immigrant just already puts a certain tone on a conversation that we want to avoid. And again, keeping the humanity in this conversation, non-citizen instead of alien. Most people on this conversation are not going to use the term anchor baby, but you do hear it instead, a child of undocumented or unauthorized immigrants. And then again, chain migration, uh, family-based migration is a much better term for that.
So, where can you send someone to find out more about what we're talking about today? And what can you do to help immediately? We're going to talk a little bit more about resources at the end of this presentation. There will also be some time for a brief question and answer period, we hope. But when we do get to the question and answer period, we do not want to hear case specific or individual situations. So if your question starts out with, I know a woman named Maria. She's a friend of mine. She's a saint. She's undocumented. I'm going to say, no, 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 no. We don't want to hide the ball. There's a legal disclaimer on this presentation, but we do provide specific legal advice in people's cases through the form of consultations for people who live within our service area. If someone has an immigration legal services question about their own specific case, they should call us. Call the Cedar Rapids office or the General Catholic Charities office to find out how to do an intake. The consultation is free, and our follow-up services, if we're able to offer them, are very low cost and affordable. If someone may have questions about their immigration legal status or just about their legal rights generally, we have made some information available on our website. It's catholiccharities.dubuque.org. And if you can't remember that, you can just Google Catholic Charities of Dubuque. And when you find our main page, there's a big button right in the middle that says what's happening in immigration. Click on that. The page that comes up about immigration, it has frequently asked questions, some other helpful information, updates when we're able to keep up with them, which is usually. I think we're very proud in our program that we've been making a great effort to get good, timely information out to the community. On that page, there's a button that says safety planning and know your rights. So that is a tremendous resource for people who may not want a consultation or you don't know how to make that referral, have them call us. In the meantime, they can look at our website. Go ahead to the next page. I'll give you just sort of a taste of what we have in our safety planning and know your rights. So, civics lesson. Congress, the legislature, makes the laws. And related to immigration, which is a federal matter, almost everything is going to be happening with the federal Congress in terms of changing laws. The executive branch, the office of the president and the president's agencies, enforce those laws. And then there's the judicial branch, which provides judicial review of the other two branches. So not a lot has changed in terms of laws. We haven't had a lot of law making or changing with this session of Congress. Where you're hearing most of the changes is with the executive branch and how they are enforcing some of those laws. We'll have more about that later on in this presentation, but certain constitutional protections remain. And again, on our website, we have a video that goes into that with a little bit more detail. You have the right to remain silent in most situations if you're being questioned. You have the right to protect yourself against self-incrimination because, as they say, anything you say could be used against you, even the things that you feel might be exculpatory. You also have a right against cruel and unusual punishment, and you have a right to due process before your rights are suspended. Here's sort of an update. With the way things are being enforced right now, you have to very carefully balance how much of your right to remain silent you want to exercise related to, for example, expedited removal. That means in certain situations, the federal government is removing people without necessarily the full due process steps that usually apply. And we can talk more about expeditious removal in detail, but I want to bring it up here only as an example of people who have been in the United States for 2 years or longer, or people who are legal permanent residents or have proof of a status that allows them to stay, may not want to exercise their right to remain silent fully. For example, if a car is pulled over, the driver must identify in the state of Iowa. The passengers, not so much. They can protect their right to remain silent. But would it be beneficial for someone who does have status or who doesn't have status but has evidence that they were in the United States for 2 years or longer? Would it be beneficial for them to disclose that? Case specific, it's just part of this update that you do have certain legal rights. You should protect those rights when appropriate and waive those rights only when you know that you're doing that in your own best interest.
We're going to talk about executive orders, but before we do, just listening to Rye, I realized that I just wanted to go over some basic information before we do so that everybody's on the same page. Rye was talking about, different statuses. And so just so that everybody understands, there are certain legal immigration statuses that are permanent, that do not expire. There are other immigration legal statuses which are time constrained, which are only give authorization to be in the United States for a certain period of time. So when looking at a permanent status, you're looking at, of course, U.S. citizenship, lawful permanent residence. You can also look at being a refugee as a permanent status. For the most part, asylum is. And when you're looking at the more temporary, student visas are, you're able to be here for the period of your study. Some of the parole that you may have heard of. Parole is a period of time in which you're authorized to be in the United States. Temporary protective status is also time constrained, though it has in the past typically been renewed. So just to give everybody that those basics before we go on. Much of what's been in the news lately has been many of the executive orders that President Trump has signed since his inauguration. So executive orders do not change the law. Instead, what they do is they provide guidance and instruction to the rest of the government on how to interpret the current laws. They are subject to congressional and judicial review, which we will talk about a little later. But they can have immediate and significant effects. We also don't always know how an executive order is going to be executed or enforced. Again, talking about that uncertainty. And executive orders result in executive actions. What that means is, again, it's how the different agencies interpret this directive from the president on different things. So many of the ways that that's done is through ICE, DHS, and USCIS memos, and that is Department of Homeland Security, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they have memos which will then again influence and instruct for agency policies. So let's look at some of the executive actions that have impacted immigrants. Recently, the goals have been ending protection and lawful pathways to status in the United States. One of the things that's happened recently is that they've rescinded the sensitive locations policy. So ICE used to have a policy in which they would not go to certain protective or sensitive locations, such as churches, places of worship, funerals, weddings, hospitals, schools, and that has now been rescinded, which means that there can be ICE enforcement actions in those locations. We've also seen a stripping of humanitarian constitutional protections, such as the attempt to terminate the parole program for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Also, the attempt to terminate birthright citizenship, which, again, will be going to the Supreme Court. I don't think that has a good, that one's pretty plainly illegal, which we can talk about. Also restricting lawful immigration and refugee admissions. I think one of the saddest things that has happened since the inauguration is that Trump has suspended the US refugee admissions program, which means that individuals and families who have participated in the UN refugee program who were assigned to come to the United States. They have been going through the process. This is a process that takes years to get through. And now all of those individuals who've been selected for the United States, their process is on hold. And there are no refugee admissions to the United States right now. This has also affected funding for refugee programs. So refugees who entered the United States are not getting the services that they should be guaranteed because of the funding cut. Again, we're seeing expansion of detention and deportation operations. Rye had mentioned the expansion of the expedited removal policy. It used to be that that was constrained to areas near the border. Now that it's anywhere in the United States. And it is anyone who has been here for less than 2 years is also subject to expedited removal. Expedited removal is a fast track removal process in which they do not have to go through the usual removal due process proceedings, which is to give a person what's called a NTA or a notice to appear in immigration court. Then that person would go to immigration court in front of an immigration judge and determine whether or not there were any routes to relief for them to remain in the United States. And then the judge would decide whether or not to order removal. Instead, with expedited removal, the dealing with the immigration judge is taken out of the picture. Trump has also invoked the Alien Enemies Act, and which is chilling. And there is extensive pending litigation and some temporary restraining orders that are in place. And I'll let Rye go on now to talk more about that NTA.
Yeah, so as Dee said, there are many executive orders that come directly from the president that have impacted how executive agencies are carrying out or applying or interpreting laws made by Congress. And an executive order is just sort of the root of the change. More changes can grow out of that with other types of executive actions throughout a given agency. So an agency head may interpret or implement an executive order, provide a memo or a guideline or some kind of new written practice for an agency to follow an executive order, distributed by the president. So it's not just executive orders that we're dealing with, it's also individual agency changes. And one change that we've seen is related to this NTA guidance. There's a lot of acronyms in immigration. There's a lot of acronyms in federal government, period. This is a notice to appear. So not every immigration agency is ICE. There are different agencies that do different things. United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, handles many stateside applications for status. ICE is, of course, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is like a police body that enforces violations of immigration law. Customs and Border Protection are the officers stationed at, our entry points at border and airports. And those three organizations, USCIS, ICE, and CBP, are all faces of the Department of Homeland Security, but they are separate agencies. You also have Immigration Court, which is the Executive Office of Immigration Review, that's EOIR, and the Department of State, whereas USCIS handles most in-country evaluations. The Department of State is involved in things that happen outside the United States, and there is some interaction between these agencies. There is some sort of fade over in their various roles. But in the past, executive agencies carrying out immigration policy usually had confidentiality practices or guidelines or rules, or at least norms. If an individual submitted an application for an immigration benefit or a status and they were denied, usually that remained confidential. to the reviewing agency, such as USCIS. A notice to appear means that, for example, if someone applies to USCIS for renewal of a green card, legal permanent resident status, or to adjust status and obtain legal permanent residency, or if they're applying to naturalize, or many of the types of benefits that USCIS reviews and grants, in the past, we would expect USCIS, if it denied that application, or if the individual chose to withdraw that application, their information would remain confidential to USCIS. But with the notice to appear guidelines, we are now led to believe, or their stated goal is, that denial or withdrawal of a request for status will result in referral to ICE or immigration court with a notice to appear for removal proceedings. So that's alarming. And, I believe that could have a chilling effect on people seeking benefits, seeking updated status, or trying to establish or maintain what they already have, because who knows how deep the agency will dig when they're just asking for a routine benefit, and could that result in referral for removal proceedings? So, if I were to just make a generic example, if someone was eligible for citizenship because they've appropriately maintained their legal permanent resident and green card status for the required period of time, if they did have some older criminal offense in their past, or something that makes them not necessarily ineligible, but subject to investigation, could that result in not just denial? I mean, if USCIS doesn't like it, they have the discretion to deny it. They always have. But now will that also lead to a notice to appear in immigration court and possibly be subject to deportation proceedings, removal proceedings? So it brings a whole new level of analysis, legal analysis, to Dee and I and our colleagues when we interview clients. We always have asked about, ineligibility, inadmissibility, or removability. Ineligible means you're coming to me for a consultation about, for example, citizenship, naturalization. It doesn't appear you're eligible. I'm glad you came to an attorney so we could review that. Or it appears you are eligible in terms of the application criteria, but you may not be admissible because of something you've disclosed that happened in the past. So again, we provide legal advice on that. And if someone is removable, if they have something of grave enough legal importance in their history that we believe they could be subject to removal from the United States, of course, we've always done this analysis. But now, knowing that the stakes are so high and that the agencies are communicating about potentially removing somebody or investigating removability, not just potentially denying an application, we believe that is a pretty significant concern.
So next, we're going to talk about international student visas and SEVID, which is the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, which you may have heard about in the news recently. So many international students are in the United States on a visa that is called an F1. This allows the student to remain in the United States for the pendency of their studies. So until graduation, and then there's typically a period which they may qualify to do further work within their field for a period of months after graduation. So what has happened recently is that um, the SEVIS system has apparently been subject to some AI, and it has gone through and looked for students with F1 visas who may have had any 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 contact with law enforcement, maybe a speeding ticket, something like that, and it's flagging them, and then it had erased their SEVIS records. This was also then leading to ICE telling them that they had to leave the United States. Luckily, there has been some litigation which has resulted in the reinstatement of many of these student visas. So that crisis seems to have abated somewhat. However, just yesterday, news broke that there was a internal ICE memo now that states that the Department of State has the ability to revoke a student visa at any time at its discretion. So again, this is something that is rapidly evolving. And I know I have had calls from students that I have done other legal work for who are very concerned, and I very much empathize with that. However, Catholic Charities, we do not practice in the area of student visas. So this is not something that we provide legal services for. We want to make sure that we are only giving advice for subjects in which we have expertise and is within our scope of practice, which is humanitarian and family immigration law. So if someone does approach me about this issue, there is a list of attorneys that I can give to refer them to who do practice student visa law in Iowa, which I'm happy to share. I'll have my email at the end of the presentation. If anyone is interested, please just shoot me an email. I will send it to you. But one thing that I can recommend for all international students is to review the safety planning and know your rights materials. So this is things like making sure that there is a power of attorney for the student. So if anything would happen, there is someone who can handle their affairs for them. Another thing that I worked with one of my clients on is having a phone tree of people so that if anything happened, that there would be information that could be shared and get to the right people. It is chilling that I had to have this kind of discussion with a wonderful student who's brilliant and absolutely is a addition to the United States being here. But that's the environment we're in. But it is important to remember that F1 visas and CVIS, they are still subject to due process. So no matter what the administration tries to do, we are a country of laws and we still have due process. So it's important to remember that we have a right to have that due process. And again, that's what a lot of the litigation is about.
Some of the immediate effects that um, the enforcement of these executive orders and agency policies, the immediate effects have been pretty alarming to a lot of people, including us as practitioners here in the Archdiocese and in the national news that we've been hearing. Perhaps the most alarming, I think, to me, is this idea that people are disappearing, that the actions of the government in enforcing immigration violations are not just haphazard and not just going outside their stated goal of taking immigration violations that are related to criminal offenses. They're not just taking them into custody, but just regular people who do have immigration relief pending, who do have some kind of legal status in the United States, even up to and including citizenship, and that the government is essentially kidnapping them and removing them not just to detainment facilities, but to like international prisons, specifically the CCOT prison in El Salvador, is identified as a place where our US government is, holding people, incarcerating people, even if they are not Salvadoran. And that would certainly be a departure from our laws, rules, and norms of the past. Um, those news stories are very alarming, and we take them very seriously. We're tracking them as best we're able. One of the things that's frustrating to me as a practitioner is this change, that we're not receiving policy updates from the government. We're not getting information beyond executive orders through official press releases or statements by agency heads. I'm an attorney. I want to see the official document. I want to see the press release. I want to see the written guidance on it. But many times, our team and the people of the United States are learning about these practices and these changes through social media, statements by non-officials affiliated with agencies, commentary on cable news television. So it can be very difficult for us to determine what the actual status, what the actual facts around these government practices are, and what the actual facts around individual circumstances are. So, um, disappearing of people who are taken into custody by government agents, and it allegedly appears to be related to an immigration violation enforcement. It's hard to get the facts on that. And I would caution you to choose your advocacy carefully and not use blanket phraseology that falls into sort of biased or politicized camps. It appears that this is happening. When I say this, I mean that people are being taken into custody by government officials and they are being detained. And we have very serious questions about how the law is being applied here, due process protections of individuals, regardless of status, the rights that they have, are those rights being respected and followed through in the courts properly? I mean, we have grave concerns about that. But it also is very difficult for us to comment on information that's not coming to us through official channels or through direct interaction with, a client who's affected by it. So some things are just enforcement. ICE has a very important job, and the federal government, the executive branch, has a very important job to protect the United States population, immigrant and citizen born here alike. The federal government has a very important job of preventing people who are ineligible from benefits from accessing those benefits improperly. And if people have committed crimes and they're of an immigrant status, perhaps they should be subject to deportation. But that should be done through a legally prescribed process. And the people of the United States, not just me because I'm an attorney, or you all watching because you care about immigrants in your community, the people of the United States create this government and fuel this government. We are this government, and we deserve to be able to know what's going on. Is it appropriate for ICE to be wearing plain clothes, driving unmarked vehicles? Sure. In certain circumstances, that is the appropriate enforcement method. Um, when they have detainment orders or warrants, and in terms of safety and how they carry out their job, I think we would expect to see some people being detained unexpectedly, because if you know when the detainment is coming, and if you are a criminal, you're probably not going to be there at the time and place that they've scheduled that. Um, but the optics of what's going on now, at the very least, are terrible. And if the allegations that people who should not be detained or should not be taken into custody are, and even worse, that they're being held in places where they're not able to communicate with relatives or attorneys, or even outside the United States, that's very alarming. Until we can get more facts about this through official channels, it's very difficult to comment beyond, we're seeing this. We recognize this is a fear in our community. We're trying to differentiate as best we can on a case-by-case basis what is legitimate enforcement and what continues to fall into this category of very alarming activity by the U.S. federal government.
And Rye, if I could give an example of just
Sure.
how difficult it is to get information about what's going on. On February 14th, there was an internal USCIS memo that was distributed that a few days later, CBS News broke the story on. And in this memo, it stated that all benefit applications at USCIS that had been submitted by individuals who entered the United States through the Cuba, Haiti, Rye, help me.
CHNV, Cuba, Haiti,
Thank you.
Nicaragua, Venezuela.
Nicaragua. Okay, thank you. That those individuals who had pending benefit applications, those applications would be put on hold, that they would not have any decisions be made on them. That is huge. These are individuals who many of them were allowed into the United States to allow them to apply for things like asylum or apply for family based immigration. And these are also individuals who, again, as a parolee, had only a limited time uh, permission to be in the United States. So the work authorization that they could apply for in association with their parole status was also going to end at some point soon. So the issue with this memo is that it was not released publicly um, until an organization did a Freedom of Information Act request to be able to see it. There was after the CBS News story broke, that reporter was able to get an official confirmation that the memo existed. So that was again maybe February 20th. It wasn't until April that we actually got to see the memo. So for all of that period of time between late February and early April, if I had any clients that had pending applications that this affected, I could tell them about the memo. I could tell them that we know that it existed, but I couldn't tell them exactly what it said or exactly what was going to be going on with it, which was just an incredible amount of frustration and uncertainty for them to not know what was going on with their applications and have this, ticking clock of their parole going to expire, and then again, maybe even be terminated. So, as an attorney, to not be able to tell my clients like what policies are affecting them is just, I mean, so much of what we deal with now is unprecedented.
And
Um,
imagine
but
their
it,
employers and imagine their
yeah,
spouses, their children, the schools that they take their children to. These are people that have a status that does allow them to be in the United States at this time, but a sort of internal, what does that mean? Confidential, secret, not disclosed memo within an agency makes a massive change that affects our communities to a very significant extent. And it's not just, us as practitioners, although our job is to be able to advise clients to the law. And we're not able to do that, even though the law hasn't changed. Now you have a ripple effect that, eventually a secret memo or a confidential memo, you need to take an additional step to find out what the government is up to after it got, leaked, perhaps intentionally or unintentionally to the news. And that's the way we're finding out about this. And the result is, a lot of chatter, a lot of politically biased discussion. Meanwhile, people's lives are affected by this on the street if they would be subject to being taken into custody.
just an example of how much this the policy sort of non-announcements are affecting everyone is to have to do a Freedom of Information Act request to get information about how a U.S. agency is functioning, or decisions it's made, that again, these are not things that deal with terrorism. These are not national security issues. That is where we find ourselves.
For the people of the United States to ask, what are we doing here? And the response, sort of generalized from the federal government is, nothing to see here. We're just doing our job. That becomes very alarming. So we don't need to go back to the previous slide, but when I was talking about disappearing, again, be very careful to link back to what Dee said at the beginning of this presentation. The language that we use, don't necessarily assume everyone taken into custody was disappeared. That seems to be the phrase that's getting legs on the news and in political and social discourse, but we don't know if that's really an accurate term. We've kind of internally been talking about like domestic rendition, which, kind of harkens back to, foreign rendition during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, which people found alarming at the time and should have, and we still do. Now it seems to be happening on our streets, and we are trying to get a grasp on exactly what's going on there, and the government's answers are not clear. So, an arrest, a detainment, a citation, a rendition, a kidnapping, a disappearance, enforcement. What do these things mean? During a time of war previously in the United States, the handling of prisoners and non-combatants and people who are not part of regular military, what laws do they fall under? when this is happening on foreign soil in a war zone. And what the United States came up with was, taking them into a form of custody and removing them from the country that they were in and detaining them somewhere else. And that was called rendition. And that was primarily something seen during a time of war in a war zone. And it was sort of linked to security and safety of American personnel and interests in the fight against terrorism. And um, domestic rendition is not an official term by any means. It just seems to be a little bit more accurate of what is being alleged to be happening with people. That it appears to be a form of rendition outside of the usual process of due process, where we take up people's rights before courts that are subject to review and advocacy and protection of people's rights to make sure that the government's getting it right when they take these drastic steps in the name of safety and security. There's in law, not to get too philosophical about it, but there's always a tension between how much freedom do you want to sacrifice for safety. And in the past, that's often been considered in cases of war actions. But, this current administration has identified immigration in the United States as a type of invasion and talked about things in terms related to war, and domestic rendition as a phrase that, again, it's not official, but sort of what we've been using to try to quantify or qualify what's happening here. So what's the answer? There are lawsuits popping up all over the United States that are trying to protect immigrants, protect the rights of not just immigrants, but citizens of the United States that have been negatively affected by this. We're waiting for congressional review, changes of actual laws or policy by Congress to clarify, limit, or expand, if appropriate, the actions of the executive branch. I don't think we're going to see a lot of action in that area. But when a controversy arises and someone brings it before a court, it will be subject to judicial review. So part of the whole executive action, agency action changes, you will see even more changes as judges restrain the federal government or order the federal government to take a certain action or enjoin the federal government from taking some particular action. So at least we can have faith and confidence in our system that things are coming before judges for review.
This is the part where we strongly advise you, please do not dabble in providing immigration legal services. Well-meaning help, unfortunately, can really hurt someone. We would suggest referring immigrants to Catholic Charities or another licensed legal services provider. So before I came and started practicing immigration law, I was a prosecutor. I dealt some with immigration, but not a lot. Coming into immigration law and learning more about it and the intricacies of it, little things can really matter. And unfortunately, a well-meaning person helping someone fill out an application that did not mean to, but put down something incorrect in an application, that can lead to down the line that person being denied
Notice to
relief,
appear.
unfortunately. Yeah. So, and we understand that cost and access can be barriers to assistance, but really now more than ever, right, is a time not to take immigration matters into your own hands. So we here at Catholic Charities, and I know the other immigration legal service providers in Iowa, we understand that there is the need, and we are trying to meet it. And just, please, please be careful. Always follow lawful processes. And also, as you work with immigrant communities, please practice self-care and be mindful of vicarious and secondary trauma. This is a very overwhelming time to be working with this population in this field, and just make sure that that you are cognizant and mindful of how that's affecting you, and to be able to take some time to have a breather. It's a privilege to be able to do that, but it is essential in order to continue to function and to assist individuals. So what can organizations do to prepare for immigration enforcement actions if they occur? So I would advise organizations to review their policies and to designate specific staff to respond to ICE requests, and consult with your own organization's legal counsel to review your privacy and visitors policies. designate an administrator or supervisor who staff make contact so that there's that person that they all know they can go to. Really remember confidentiality and any notice requirements. And when responding to search or arrest warrant requests, consider your response based upon the documentation provided. And just important, do not attempt to physically interfere with ICE agents, even if the agents appear to be acting without consent or not doing what they're supposed to or exceeding their purported authority. It's important to, that is what needs to be handled later through, through litigation or other means. In the moment is not the time.
So, something that I'm not sure if it made it onto this list or not, but call your legislator. And it looks like we may have a few minutes for question and answer at the end, but this came up in one of the questions about things that are happening in Iowa. Uh, so there is a bill called HF 572, which, under the guise of smuggling people, would restrict people, just non-criminal regular individuals, from assisting or being even found in the same place potentially as someone whose immigration status is expired or non-existent. I mean, you could call your legislator, and your state legislator for Iowa related bills, your federal legislator, that would be your federal congressperson or senator, and say that you don't like what's happening. This is a government for and by the people, so please do that. And we already talked a little bit about know your rights, safety planning, and the various things that you can do to help people and, advocate for immigrants in our community. And the name of that bill was HF 572, for someone that followed up with that. We have some national resources on immigration, and I believe these are also either available on our website or available by request. So I don't want you to feel like you have to scribble these all down right now. These are national organizations that are great sources of information for what's going on with immigration. And I think Dee has a few Iowa organizations to share. Then we'll wrap it up. We'll get to some Q&A, and hopefully we can answer some of the questions that you have.
So these are just a list of some Iowa immigration organizations. Of course, us, Catholic Charities. There's also Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice in Des Moines, who is a great nonprofit immigration legal service provider and advocacy organization. Here in Cedar Rapids, there's the Catherine McCauley Center, who serves refugees. In Iowa City, there's the Prairie Lands Freedom Fund. This is an organization that helps those who are detained by immigration officials try to get bond so that they are able to be released. There's the Refugee and Immigrant Voices in Action, REVA. Also in Iowa City is IC Compassion, Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa, Embark Iowa. If you are looking for ways to help immigrants and want to volunteer, I highly recommend contacting any of these organizations. Again, if you have questions about which specific organizations may be appropriate for you, please give us an email. We can certainly refer you. And last but not least, this is our contact information. If you have individuals who are interested in doing a consultation, they can either go to our website and click the link to enter their information as being interested, or they can give our office phone number a call and inquire about the process to start. We are not an emergency immigration services organization, so there will be a wait before being able to be scheduled for a consultation. But we do try to serve everyone, regardless of religion, faith, economic need, and we really want to make sure that we are providing information to people who are seeking it, even if it's someone who we do not end up representing.
I think what we're going to try to fit in for the next few minutes here is some questions that popped up in the chat. And so I've been monitoring the chat. And so I'm going to scroll through and post some questions, and Dee and Rye, whichever one of you want to, I think, cover it, that'd be great. So I think, let's see here. The first question I have here is, can you talk about the immigration-related bills that have passed or are pending in the Iowa legislature that we're most troubled with? And can you also talk about Governor Reynolds implementing 287G task force without public comment or pre-knowledge? I think we had mentioned briefly about House File 572, which is the also known as the smuggling bill, right? But I think this individual, Rochelle Friedman, wants to know a little bit more about other bills. And Ryan, do either of you want to tackle that?
Immigration is an exploding topic right now among many state legislatures, and Iowa is included in that. There's a tremendous political um, trend towards writing laws that restrict immigration or the rights of immigrants in some way, sort of under the guise that, the people of the United States must be protected from immigrants. In fact, statistics show that immigrants commit less crimes on average. And, outside of statuses expiring or being unavailable, immigrants are generally not breaking the law. But there is this trend in our laws, and I think getting into specific acts, before the legislature or specific things that the governor has done is a little bit beyond the scope of this particular meeting. But that House file, HF stands for House file. It's something pending before the Iowa House of Representatives. That's one right now that since it's pending and hasn't been signed by the governor yet, you should call, or you can, I guess I should say, you can call your state legislator and say that you don't agree with the tone and tenor of that law. In terms of general advice, I would say if you do call a legislator, you could say, I do not agree with, the laws that you're writing and the trends that you're promoting that restrict the rights of immigrants in our state. What we need are laws and rules that allow immigrants to access our immigration system better and establish status better. Dee, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've probably covered it. With the 287G task force, that is where it's an agreement between the Iowa Department of Safety and the federal government that would allow members of the Department of Public Safety, so the Iowa State Patrol, and other law enforcement in Iowa to assist with immigration enforcement in a limited capacity. Again, I think that's probably outside the scope of what is our purpose today, other than to say that yes, I think that is again, it's just another one of the very chilling things that is going on. There is some pending litigation with it in Iowa. There was recently a traffic stop, and I know that there is a civil rights complaint that has been filed regarding that. So I would suggest looking further into that if you want more information about what the latest updates are.
I
I
just
would,
tackled another question here in the chat.
yep.
Someone asked, if you're arrested, it seems you only have the right to one phone call. Who should it be? A family member, your lawyer, to let them know you want to discuss your case, or what do you suggest? So that's not true that you only get one phone call. Jail policy or detainment policy is going to differ depending on where you're being held, but generally you're not limited to just one. If you have an immigration attorney and you're detained related to an immigration matter, yeah, you should call your immigration attorney and let them know where you are, how long you are likely to be there, and what number to reach you at. If it's detainment for or an arrest for a criminal act, that's a little bit different of a question. For most crimes, you'll have the right to counsel, and you should communicate with your attorney as soon as you're able. If you do have the opportunity to use the phone, and you do not have an attorney, one of the points on our safety planning is that you should memorize numbers of people you trust. So a trusted family member like a spouse or a parent or an adult child. You should not discuss your case on the phone because phone calls from detainment are likely recorded and anything you say could be used against you. But you should let your family member know, again, where you are, how to reach you, how long you plan to be there, and that you probably will need the assistance of an attorney. Do we want to move on to the next question here? It looks like there's one about ICE.
I've got another question here. Yeah, so I think Ryan D, there's one about ICE check-ins. Is there anything staff or volunteers should be aware of or anything they should do to help prepare folks for ICE check-ins? Specifically, volunteers and staff are a bit afraid, and even if someone does not have anything on their record, that they should be detained at their appointment. And we want to know what the steps are to proceed if, quote, God forbid, this were to happen to someone. So any suggestions about that question?
I think it's really important before anyone goes to an ICE check-in that they again go over the know your rights and the safety planning, just to make sure that all of those things are in place in case, God forbid it, they would be detained. So again, that includes having a power of attorney for financial matters. Also, if there are children involved, having a power of attorney directive to designate someone to make decisions for that child if the parent is detained. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a ton that you can do if someone is going to be detained to stop it in that moment. But some of the other things that can be done is again, supporting organizations that work towards providing bail for people who, or I'm sorry, bond for people who are detained, like Prairie Lands Freedom Fund.
I've got this question here for Ryer D. Talk about the alien registration requirement in just brief summary, if you guys want to just handle that.
In terms of the registration requirement, first of all, go to uscis.gov. That's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services official page, and see if you are required to register. So we're talking about a big intangible here. Tell us about the requirement to register. First of all, if it doesn't apply to you, but you want to learn more about it, or if you think it may apply to you, go to the government website and see what their criteria are as published right now. If I could kind of bounce back to the ICE question, one thing that I think goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is if you have a requirement for immigration or for any legal purpose, you have to do it. You have to do it. I get it that we are alarmed by what appear to be government actions that may not follow the law or don't follow it the way we expect them to. But if you have an appointment, if you have a requirement that it is necessary for you to do, our advice is you have to do it. If you have an immigration court hearing, you have to show up. Whether the registration requirement applies to, you personally, or if you're just bringing up a hypothetical situation, again, if somebody has a question about that, they should probably schedule a consultation with us or another attorney. We have some resources on our previous slides that are great places to go for information about more of all of these topics. So that's kind of the brief overview of that. None of this stuff with immigration is so broad that we can just give a general rule that's going to answer all questions. There are so many different ways that people are already registered, through their I-94 or through the process by which they entered or because they participated in some program, that we can't just give a blanket recommendation of like, yeah, do it or don't do it. Many people are probably already registered. Dee, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just that again, it can be a case by case basis analysis. There are many people who are already who would already be considered registered and are exempt from this requirement. So anybody with a green card, anyone who has applied for a green card, anyone who's been issued a immigrant or non-immigrant visa, anyone with a work authorization card, anyone who was issued an I-94 when they entered the United States, anyone who is already in removal proceedings, or anyone who has been paroled into the United States. So there is actually a pretty large group of people that are exempt from this. So that's important to remember too. Again, go to the USCIS site. They do have the list of who is exempt, who is required. And again, if there's any question about it, that would be a time where a consultation would be.
And go to our website, read the materials there, watch the video on Know Your Rights and Safety Planning, and encourage others to do that too. The resources that we've listed on previous slides in this presentation are great sources of information if you'd like to know more. So one of the worst pieces of misinformation that people spread around is that attorneys are lying all the time. That's just simply not true. Attorneys are not lying all the time. We're a tremendously regulated group of professionals, and especially with Catholic Charities, our ethics and morality, confidentiality are some of our highest values. But there is one time when attorneys are always lying, and that's when an attorney says, "I'm going to be brief." So I'm trying to keep my
Uh,
answers as short as possible. And Dee, I think you've done a great job, and I've done my best to try to answer questions concisely. These are complicated topics. So,
there was a question in the comments about, with all of the bad news and policies, with immigration, like, is there any good news or policies that you should be aware of? And I just wanted to share a piece of good news that I received this week, which again, this is one case, but it shows you good things can happen. Things, like things can go right the way they're supposed to, which is there is a unaccompanied minor who I have been representing and involved with since 2018. And so we applied for special immigrant juvenile status for this individual, got him an Iowa State guardianship to allow him to apply for that status. He received it. Unfortunately, with that status, there is a wait to be able to apply for a green card once you've received SIJS. And so his time was finally up. And just this week, we received news that he has been approved for his green card. So that has made me tremendously happy. It has been, I can't believe, a 7-year wait. But we are going to have a newly minted lawful permanent resident. And he has just worked so hard and been such a wonderful member of the community. And I think I speak for all the staff here when I say he's just a joy to work with. So I am very excited to share at least that piece of good news, that there are still flowers amongst the dismay that we have to deal with all the time. So there is still good things happening.
congratulations,
And
Dee. And, I would say, within our program, we are still seeing successes. We are still seeing applications processed appropriately. We have received some favorable decisions from immigration judges and from USCIS. So for us to suggest, which I don't believe we have, but if your impression is that the government is completely lawless and that there are no immigration benefits that are being allocated and no processes that are still working, that would be incorrect. We are still providing legal services, and not just us, private attorneys and other organizations are still assisting immigrant clients. It's just, there are so many changes. Any change for the good or better results in delays in the federal system. A butterfly flaps its wings in Central Park, and the federal government takes another month to do something that it should have done a week ago. But we are still seeing some things work appropriately. But most of our updates, unfortunately, in terms of changes and government practices are, not something pleasing to people who are advocates of immigrants. What's our next
and maybe
question?
this is a good segue. I just wanted to highlight a comment here from Chief Police talking about referencing to the 287G. Despite the darkness that we're seeing here, there are things each of us can do to participate and help move us toward the lightness, right? And each of us can take action. So, former chief is saying, recommending that each of us, talk to our city council members and mayors and tell them about why 287G involvement is not a good thing, that these efforts are being pushed locally, right? So you have to take local actions to make that ripple effect. So this is one of those things that we can all do to create positive change It starts locally to have national impact. And these are things that each of us can take part in doing. And I think this segues to Ari's question about these are heartbreaking times for many families who are facing hardships, particularly because of detainment and deportation. And so Ari's question is that, these families are having to make really challenging questions about paying legal fees or feeding their families. And could we share information about organizations and resources? So I think the question is just what other ways can we provide support beyond the legal services? And I think that each community has different resources, and I would certainly encourage actually our website. If you go to our portal website with the parish portal, there's a list of organizations in each county that can be a resource for immigrants as well as citizens with respect to non-legal services. In our Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, and Dubuque offices, we have case managers. And so I would certainly encourage anyone who is in need of non-legal services, particularly this situation, to contact our Catholic Charities office to connect with one of our case managers to navigate some of those resources as well.
I just wanted to briefly to touch upon the, choosing between paying legal fees and feeding their families. I understand the economic difficulties that many of the people that we see are going through. I just wanted to clarify that here at Catholic Charities, not only do we have very low legal services fees, but we also have a income-based fee schedule so that we look at a person's household income, their household size, and then we have different tiers of fee levels for those individuals. So we never want anyone to not receive legal services because of an economic reason. And we will certainly work with anyone who needs assistance or needs payment plans. I mean, some of our fees are, for say for naturalization, are as low as $75 for the application for our assistance, which is very, very low. And I will say about another question, we are actually seeing a lot of requests for consultations for naturalization, which is, I think, a beautiful thing to come out of all of this, which is motivating people to become US citizens. And there's nothing that I love better than creating or helping create US citizens and getting them their certificates of naturalization. I love going to naturalization ceremonies and then providing them information on voting and becoming a involved member of our democracy.
And traveling
So
with a U.S. passport instead of a
yes,
legal permanent resident card for reentry.
right.
Yep.
So again, we do not want money to be a barrier for anyone to be able to access our legal services, and we do have our programs in place to ensure that.
That said, our resources can be limited because there's only so many of us on the Catholic Charities team, and we only practice within our service area. And, if people come to us for a consultation and we're not able to provide follow-up services, we do have a list of immigration legal services providers in Iowa that we can provide for referral. Yeah, sometimes cost is a barrier. To one of the other questions in the chat, is it advisable for somebody just to have an attorney sort of on retainer in case they're doing, advocacy or are an immigrant with concerns? I guess I don't know if that's advisable or not. That's a very broad question, and an immigration attorney might not always be the type of attorney to have, and for what service. We don't do that. You can't just come to Catholic Charities and say, if we give you money, will you be there if I need you? We need to have an identifiable immigration legal service that we provide where that need is present. But yeah, if people have concerns about their legal status or some activity that they're engaging in that they think they may need legal counsel, they should certainly investigate what the opportunities for that are. I saw another quick, just kind of knock it out quick question that is going to mostly be a referral back again to our website and the Know Your Rights materials. Can a law enforcement officer, like not a federal ICE or Customs and Border Protection, like Iowa State Patrol, local police, or Sheriff's Department, can they ask someone about their immigration status? I mean, yeah, they can. It's a free country. Whether you are required to answer is probably the more pertinent question. And we have more information about that on our Know Your Rights and Safety planning. You do have a right to remain silent. If you are driving a vehicle, you have partially waived that right because you agree when you drive a vehicle that you will present identifying information in the form of your license, or if you don't have it, you'll just provide it, proof of registration and proof of insurance. So if you're a passenger in the vehicle, of course, law enforcement can ask, hey, you in the passenger seat, what's your name? You have immigration status, but are you required to answer? Most likely not, unless they have some kind of probable cause or reasonable suspicion that would give them the right to investigate those things. And even then, you would have the right to remain silent. So review our safety planning and know your rights so that you can learn more about that. Again, some of that's very situation specific, and I certainly hear things that are happening in the community. And just like I said about government practices, when I'm hearing it third hand, it's very difficult to get the facts and know whether something was appropriate enforcement or whether it was some improper practice by, a government, whether state, local, or federal agency.
I want to take the opportunity to I don't think we've addressed Gabriella's question about how visa and green card processes are being affected during this time. So what we are seeing overall, again, just very generally, is probably more vetting, more scrutiny on these applications. We are also seeing them take likely more time to be processed. USCIS as an agency only has so many workers, so it also depends on where the agency is putting their priorities when it comes to assigning personnel to adjudicate or process certain types of applications. I see an insanely long list for approval, and unfortunately, a lot of the wait times are insanely long. They were long before COVID. They've gotten even longer since. And again, I don't see this improving that very much at all. So one of the toughest things to explain to people who have viable relief is just how long immigration processes take. And I know coming from criminal law into immigration law, it was a shock to me how long certain processes take. So we just have to counsel patience. And again, it's just more of the uncertainty that people have to live with when they deal with immigration matters. We are still seeing things processed, though slowly.
Yeah, as we said earlier in this presentation, the laws haven't changed. So most of the benefits and statuses, processes available for immigrants are still available. I mean, the law hasn't changed. The government still has to do it. But we are seeing things and how they're carried out, not only because of what Dee just said, but also taxes are being cut. What do you think funds federal agencies? Personnel are being laid off. We are seeing staff reductions in USCIS, in our enforcement agencies, and even in immigration court, even at the same time that the federal government is decrying backlogs and slow processing. So to summarize, the answer to that question is some practices have changed, but the law is still the same. Everything takes longer.
I just want to say thank you to all of you who have stuck around. We feel this is a privilege for us to be able to share resources and information to you. This is an opportunity for us to say thank you for your solidarity and commitment and dedication to uplifting the dignity of our immigrant brothers and sisters, and welcoming them and creating a safe space to know that they are not alone, and we all need each other to be able to move forward and find lightness in times when things are challenging. So thank you for your dedication and heart. We will continue to do our best to provide updates as appropriate. And again, feel free to reach out to our team here. We are very fortunate to have a fantastic immigration legal services team here, Ryan D, as well as Mayor Matunas and Jim Jacobson and Sadat Ahmadi make up the bulk of our legal services leaders here. So thank you to our great team here. And thank you for all of you for being here with us today.